gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Omar Norman on our show this evening. Omar is the head of the UNDP's regional center here in Colombo. Looks after some 30-odd countries' support for UN officers. I invited you to talk about the fallout of the global crisis and the region that that your office looks after, which I believe includes billions of poor people. Welcome to the show, Omar.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Last week we had Razin Salih on the show who described this global crisis not as a market failure as such. He said, yeah, true, some financial markets have failed, but by and large it's a government failure, and putting more money to stimulate aggregate demand, deficit expenditure, will actually worsen the problem. And what one needs to do is to get credit flowing to markets, to banks, and let the supply response come, and there will be a natural pickup. How do you, from your vantage point, see the problem? Because now there seems to be many theories. This is what has happened, and therefore this is the solution. So, your view?
Yes, thanks, Acha. If this is described as a failure of government and not of markets, that's just factually incorrect. That's not a view. That's just simply not true. Markets have failed. Now, you can raise the issue of why governments did not anticipate market failure. But for that, you have to go back to the Reagan years, where we were told that free markets will do this. The state is an evil institution, and all you do is deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. One of the biggest lessons of this crisis is free markets are dangerous. We are all for markets, but you have to have some mechanism to curb their excesses of booms and busts. So we have a real problem with free markets.
Yeah, but I mean, if you dig a little deeper, Omar, I mean, now see what happened was, Basel I, Basel II and all that. Also, there was regulatory failure in a sense, that made banks actually take out assets from their books and create all these derivatives so that they can meet capital adequacy requirements and so on. So those also, led to all these so-called toxic assets that existed and no one knew. And do you believe that was part of the failures of the policy and the...
You see, the issue is why. Why is it that the role of governments in regulating markets has vanished? It's been an ideological move. Nobody is against markets, but untrampled markets create this kind of disaster. So when you have an environment into which even for 10 years the US kept saying don't intervene in markets, don't do a regulatory framework, you had all kinds of accountancy firms giving a clean bill of sheet. I really find that this recession is also a moral issue. This is a shameless recession. It's shameless in the sense that people are not going to jail. We have now suffered a colossal collapse of the world economy, and it is so shameless that people are not being taken to jail for it. So I think this is a much wider issue, and to start blaming it on governments is a way that people are abdicating responsibility for market failures.
Yeah, but I want to move beyond, but I have to say this. If you look at, the epicenter of this whole thing is the United States, right? United States has had, loose monetary policy, Greenspan years, and Razin was talking about, what is the word he used? Something like shameless fiscal expansion something to that effect, right? The war and all that in Iraq, and so there's been, while I agree about the whole regulatory framework and lax regulation, government also had pump prime this whole crisis. It's not as if they had no role to play.
No, I don't want to picture governments as saints and markets as sinners. There are two aspects to your question. One is the role of people such as Greenspan, who actually recently mentioned that one of his biggest errors was to look the other way on hedge funds and derivative markets, which he promoted. So this was extreme irresponsibility of promoting highly risky measures so that yields could be higher as an alternative with instruments which were non-normal instruments. So all these processes that started were no doubt encouraged by government policy. Go into hedge funds, go into derivatives, the returns will increase and your stakeholders will have higher return. So to that extent, people like Greenspan should share a great burden of blame for allowing markets to function in the manner that they were. The other point is different on the fiscal stimulus in the United States. The United States had forgotten that basically what it preached to other countries, live within your means, is not what it was doing. We live in a bizarre world where one of the poorest countries of the world, China, transfers money to one of the richest countries in the world, the United States.
Right.
You refer to the war-related expenditures. The Iraq war and this global economic crisis have had two very major effects in the first decade of the 21st century. The global political system has broken down and the global economic system has broken down. The breakup of the global political system began with the Iraq war. When powerful nations engage in an illegal war, which is not sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council, there is a systemic breakdown. At the economic level, when the major institutions of global capital, banks, AIG insurance, massive institutions of great faith, they crumble, you lose faith in the system. And that is what has happened, that the icons of capital, the responsible companies of the world, have crashed, and we have no faith in them. That's a systemic breakdown. And to revive trust in institutions, both at the economic level and at the political level, is a huge task which goes way beyond the details of fiscal policy, monetary policy. It's a systemic breakdown.
Billions of people in the region that you particularly are responsible for in the UNDP's center here. Hunger is an issue. People are just very, very poor. So earlier on in 2008, we saw commodity prices, going through the roof. People were pushed into poverty in the millions, right? Hundreds of millions. Now suddenly there is no growth, right? Economies are shrinking.